He did not doubt for a moment that he was dealing not merely with technical matters, but with issues of serious philosophical import. Welcome back to Pens and Poison Literary Lovers. I'm your host Liza, and we're back this month with another installment of Liza's Book Club. For the month of October, we read The Melancholy of Resistance together, and I'm so excited to read it and analyze it with you here today. Here on Pens and Poison, we love all things literature, but we also recognize that we all run busy lives and don't always find the time to read, myself included. I'm here to remedy that with Liza's Book Club, a brand new series where we'll commit to reading just one book a month and analyzing it together. Each month, I'll read a book with you and we'll analyze it and discuss it at the end of the month through questions that you can leave me here or over on Instagram. You can follow us on Instagram at Pens and Poison. You can also check out the companion reading guide that is up on the Pens and Poison Substack that should have been emailed out to you if you're on the Pens and Poison mailing list. If you're not on my mailing list, don't forget to sign up either at LizaLibes.com or at pensandpoison.org. We'll also link the study guide below. Let's get to it. The Melancholy of Resistance. So the Melancholy of Resistance centers around a mysterious circus that sends a grim Hungarian town spiraling into chaos. At the center of this circus is a massive stuffed whale that pretends doom and unrest. The novel is an apt political allegory that explores themes of power, resistance, and the fragility of order, weaving together the lives of the town's inhabitants as they confront the absurdity of existence. Through a tapestry of dense prose and a Kafkaesque atmosphere, Krasznahorkai meditates on the societal collapse and the individual struggle against external forces. I am so glad I learned how to pronounce this guy's name. I didn't want to say his name in last month's video, but I think I got it right this time. László Krasznahorkai. Krasznahorkai is a Hungarian author known for his bleak and challenging novels. His debut novel is Satan Tango, which brought him critical acclaim and established him as one of Eastern Europe's most influential contemporary authors. In The Melancholy of Resistance, he explores the instability of post-Soviet Eastern Europe through intricate paragraphs and dense sentences. You can see here, I don't know if you guys can see it, but there are basically no paragraphs anywhere, ever. Krasznahorkai's style includes these intricate paragraphs and dense sentences, and the novel is considered one of his most important works. It reflects the Hungarian socio-political atmosphere of the 1980s through themes of despair, anarchy, and moral decay. We have a couple of characters to note throughout the book. So first of all, there's Valuska. He's our protagonist. He's a young man who assists the eccentric Mrs. Esther, who we'll get to in a second. Valuska embodies innocence and passivity, specifically through his childlike fascination for the cosmos, but is drawn to the chaos that ensues with the arrival of the circus and becomes a little bit of a morally ambiguous character. Then there's Mrs. Esther. So Tunda Esther is an ambitious, manipulative woman who seeks power over the town and uses the arrival of the circus as her excuse to implement her desired fascistic regime. Her cold rationality contrasts Valuska's naivete and plays a key role in her attempt to impose order amidst anarchy. Then we have Mr. Esther, her husband, who is estranged from her. He's a reclusive former music teacher and is fascinated by the concept of entropy and believes the world is in irreversible decline. He talks a lot about music, and his pessimism and detachment make him a powerful foil to Mrs. Esther's pragmatic ambition. Finally, we have the prince. The prince is a shadowy, nearly mythical creature who arrives with the circus and incites fear and unrest amongst the townspeople. He represents chaos and a latent threat to the established order. So let's talk a little bit about the plot. We start off with a bleak evening. The elderly Mrs. Plouffe is on her way home to her small Hungarian town and observes a spirit of unrest in the air. She settles in her apartment once she gets back, and she receives a visit from the brash Mrs. Esther, who's this authoritarian figure, as we said. And Mrs. Esther demands her help in convincing her husband, the dreamy Mr. Esther, with whom she split a long time ago, to participate in her new project to bring order to the decaying town. Mrs. Plouffe turns her down and sends Mrs. Esther on her way, leaving Mrs. Esther to look elsewhere to consummate her goals. There's a big sense of dread in the town with the arrival of a giant stuffed whale. It's purported to be the biggest whale in the world. The townsfolk become increasingly fascinated by the whale, and then we meet the young Voluska, a starry-eyed drunkard who works odd jobs and has a particular fascination with the cosmos. There's a particularly famous scene in the novel where Voluska is drunk in a bar and he puts on this kind of recreation of the cosmos where one person is the moon and another person is the sun, and it's probably one of the most memorable scenes in the novel. So Voluska works for the former music teacher Mr. Esther, the husband of Mrs. Esther, of course, and considers Mr. Esther a really, really close friend of his. Mrs. Esther then approaches Voluska to blackmail Mr. Esther into doing her bidding. If he doesn't agree, Mrs. Esther threatens to move back in with him, which is something that neither of them want. So after a long night of drinking, Voluska sets out to consult with Mr. Esther and convinces him to join his wife's Clean Up the Town initiative. As Voluska and Mr. Esther part, Voluska overhears the circus director arguing with a mysterious figure known colloquially as the Prince, who threatens to split with the circus troupe and informs the circus director that he has the power to incite his followers to participate in a violent uprising. When the circus director brushes him off, the Prince compels his followers to riot in the city, bringing the town into chaos and unrest. As Mr. Esther boards up his windows, he soon learns that Voluska has joined the rioters. Mr. Esther sets out to find Voluska, but stumbles instead on a town hall hearing from one of the rioters. He finds that Mrs. Esther has begun a strategic push to take control of the town council, exploiting the growing disorder for her own political benefit. The consummation of the riots allow Mrs. Esther to fully establish her Clean Up the Town regime, which compels all townspeople to follow strict orders. The novel closes with the funeral of Mrs. Plouffe, who has been murdered by the rioters. The Melancholy of Resistance is certainly an interesting read. Krasznahorkai doesn't really know what paragraphs are, and I don't speak Hungarian. It's like the 5th most difficult language to learn after Mandarin, Japanese, Korean, and Arabic. But I guess given that it's its own language group, it must lend itself very well to some crazy long sentences. I thought the translator did a superb job, though this might be the first actual novel I'm reading translated from Hungarian. This is good, guys. Gotta give us some variety. Okay, so what do we think of this complex book? It's a book about order and chaos, for one. The arrival of the circus disturbs the fragile stability of an already decaying town, illustrating how societal order is easily upended by chaos and uncertainty. Krasznahorkai asks us to consider the fine line between order and chaos and whether order is really the more desirable outcome. As the novel's title suggests, we also have tension between resistance and submission. So while Mrs. Esther resists chaos through control, Voluska embodies submission and accepts the universe's unpredictability through his childlike wonder. Krasznahorkai uses this contrast to paint a grim picture of how quickly societal norms can disintegrate in a fragile society. The town's descent into violence and despair underscores the precariousness of human constructs and the underlying potential for collapse. But most fundamentally, The Melancholy of Resistance is a novel about the absurdity of life. The Whale is itself an absurdity and can be read as humanity's inability to find meaning in the face of the absurd, leaving us with the question, what can we do to find meaning? This was definitely a dense read. It took me the bulk of the month to get through. Didn't really have many chapters, and the block paragraphs made it quite difficult to read, but I'm really glad I got through it. I'm still trying to piece my thoughts together on what I want to take away from this novel, but I think we've definitely said a lot about the political instability and the unrest in this novel, and a lot about the absurd as well. I'm gonna have to go ahead and read Satan Tango because Krasznahorkai has definitely gotten me interested. There's also a really, really famous movie called The Werkmeister Harmonies that is supposed to be one of the best movies of the 21st century. I believe it came out in 2001. I will definitely have to check that out, and Krasznahorkai actually wrote the screenplay himself, so it's bound to be fantastic. All right, well, I'll leave you guys to think about the absurdity of life as we transition to our Q&A portion of today's video. So every month I post a call for questions over on Instagram. You'll have the chance to have your questions answered directly, so don't forget to follow us over on Pens and Poison for a chance to see your question featured in monthly book club videos. Let's do these questions. Okay, Peter asks, what's up with the whale? Okay, so you can interpret the whale in several ways. It's massive, grotesque, it's enigmatic. It could represent the overwhelming forces like fear and violence that the townspeople can't fully grasp. It also embodies the novel's heavy and surreal atmosphere. And finally, as I've said, it represents absurdity. I mean, imagine bringing in a giant stuffed whale and not really explaining it. It's just the absurd. Jen asks, what is the melancholy of resistance that the title refers to? That's a really great question. So, the melancholy of resistance could refer to the sense of hopelessness in resisting forces that are fully beyond our control. The melancholy here is a deep existential despair that arises when our efforts seem futile, yet when we persist anyway. It's about the tension between action and inevitable decay, which is a pretty haunting thought. It's about a world that's teetering on the edge and the question of whether we can save it or not. And she says, how can I get past Krasznahorkai's long sentences? You know what? Once you get past a lot of the long-winded sentences and really get into it, it's strangely hypnotic. So every night I'd pick up the novel. Once again, I did this for about every day for 20 days because it's only like a 300-page novel, but it took me quite a long time to get through. But it would take me like 10 to 20 minutes to really get into it. And the reading experience is slow. I'll give you that. It doesn't read very easily, and obviously it's a translation, so that's going to slow you down even more. But I think once you really get into the flow, the reading experience becomes a little bit more seamless. I would definitely feel a little bit distracted at first when I was reading. I'd read a sentence and it would be like 17 pages long and I would be like, I don't know what the hell I just read, and then I have to go back and reread it. But the prose definitely mirrors this kind of spiraling, oppressive atmosphere of the town and its people, and it makes you feel immersed in their world of doom. So just power through it for 10 minutes and you should get into it from there. All right, guys, well, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed our discussion of the Melancholy of Resistance. Next month, we'll be diving into the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, so make sure to hit that subscribe button, ring the notification bell to get notified of when our next episode goes live, and don't forget to follow Pens and Poison over on Instagram and subscribe to the Pens and Poison Substack at pensandpoison.org to get your monthly Liza's Book Club study guide delivered directly to your inbox. Also, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the Melancholy of Resistance in the comments below. Leave me your thoughts. What did you like? Did you understand this book at all? I'm still kind of going through it, so let me know if you understood it a little bit more than I did, and I'll see you next month. Thank you guys so much for joining me on Pens and Poison. Happy reading.